Activism.
Okay. What do you say?
Have you ever heard of verbal activism? You know, I'm against activists in the sense that I got friends who say like...
No, you're against activists.
Yet I'm accused of being an activist. I'm accused of being an activist.
Okay.
I got a friend that says that because I'm against abortions, that means that I would stop everybody else from having one. But there's a difference between verbally expressing what you feel to be right and wrong and then forcing it upon other people.
Okay.
So what is the obsession? Is the obsession that merely for having that opinion? Am I obsessed merely because I know and I'm dogmatic about the opinions I have? I may verbally force...
We're talking about when that obsession affects another person in an interpersonal relationship. That's what we're talking about.
That's exactly right. And, you know, the point is that if you can... It depends on how it affects the relationship. Yes, if you are talking about it continuously and you're always going to meetings and you have no time for the intimate relationship, it's going to suffer, whether it be golf or whether it be football or whether it be animal rights or whether it be whatever. It's got to be moderation and there's got to be compromise. So the relationship is not going to continue.
It's not necessarily important to another.
I would agree with you.
And that's the problem here. You quantifying somebody else's interest, saying yours is more important than somebody else's. That's
Out of time. No, he didn't say that. He didn't say that. He didn't say that. Back in a moment. Back in a moment. So we agree. We agree that it's nobody's right to say what's important to you, right? Okay, that's what we agree on. You wanted to say...
And Jesus said, "It is the Sabbath, and yet my Father in heaven keeps working." Yes, God is a creator whose works are ever in progress, even if only in the constant cycles of reproduction, of rejuvenation, of organic decay, and planetary orbital laws. But he is a God of purpose, and what man thinks is progress is destroying the earth. Yes, Earth is under construction, and so God has established a construction plan. And as all construction projects, you must stand in the zones of safety or you'll die. The asteroid is coming. It has a purpose. Striking the deep ocean, it will restore a water canopy for 1,000 years by sending water up 52 miles high. This will protect organic life from carbon-14 poisoning to longevity, and it will also compress the atmosphere downward to a lower altitude with the intent of higher growth speed. He is restoring that canopy that came down in 40 days of 2370 BC. Whether it was he who brought it down, or whether the showy display of angelic powers for 970 years. Scientists and churches are both schools who react and reject hearing truth. Both have many truths they staunchly hold to and pound into the world, whether by preaching with the collected tax-free cash charities hoarded for their goals, or whether by schools supported by the taxed public, forced to supply the cash to teach all children, even if textbooks include manipulative, endorsed, destructive lies. Thus, this presentation doesn't just expect opposition and hatred, found these days against every word, but also knows it will rise up. Satan is behind it, pushing opposition with his spirit. Very soon, Obama will announce an asteroid impact. He has no choice. God will not let him hide that day and hour without repercussions against him. But the odds are he will declare martial law with the whole world and its United Nations. What they will do by expecting all to stay home inside, as Pharaoh expected when the Red Sea comet came to Earth, is kill 8 billion people. This is the same as the angels from God who told humans not to listen nor believe the ridiculous claims of Noah. Their knowledge of God was greater than Noah's. This is why we need Christ to return to free us from government control when this asteroid is proven as a date of astral impact to Earth. We need someone like Moses with the truth and Word of God in how to survive it. Who can survive? Well, the scripture says that God wants no one to die, but that all should repent, which means turn around, and so stay alive. Yes, live. So what others call destruction is God's construction project. He is building the temple the size of the whole earth and filling it with 28 billion people who have already been born. Thus we can be assured that the pre-flood world had enough trees that all men could have survived it Noah's way by building arks, also just like him. So too then today those who die do so due to their own fault, their own blame, even if it is as simple as in mere negligence or ignorance to not care. This following presentation and exercise is with intent to show you that God does not hide the truth, and never has, not even for people who wish to claim that he holds back knowledge from people until he chooses it to be known. So many like to say that if Satan unveils the truth before God does, that then God opposes that truth and doesn't want it known yet. This is their excuse for being deliberately in ignorance, so that they do not have to be burdened by learning, nor by demands of expectations or requirements to be right with God. They rather have a priest clean our water with a prayer than to use the chlorine or fluoride that God provides. Though too much chlorine bleach will kill a person drinking the water, God has for days and years and millennia proven that the prayer isn't going to kill bad bacteria. Yet people still bless the water, just like cultures imagine that when cooking with the methane of a dung cake, that the E. coli is killed by packing the dung in the shape of an idol god. We can thank Ur's king, Shulgi, for that, giving Abram one of many good reasons to leave Ur, and call him King Dungi with his dungy idols. So now let us present to you the true human history of mankind. Adam, created 6,000 years ago, was preceded by a universe millions of years old. Time is motion, so to say Earth is millions of years old is to say it orbited and circled 1,000,000 times. Perhaps it did this, circled 1,000,000 times in only its first 200,000 years. The expression that all things are relative does not mean all things are shrugged shoulder of unimportance or opinion. It means all things have relation to other things. This relation is what time is. There is no space-time continuum. It is a matter-time continuum, an energy-time continuum. Empty space has no time. There are no perfect parallel worlds where we exist sinning differently or living perfectly at this same hour. Reality is our nature. It is our Genesis.
Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
And there was a 24-hour night upon the ocean. But God said, "Let there be light." And the cloud encircling the earth began to thin, so that the light came to be upon the ocean. And there was day, and there was night.
But hey, wait a minute, stop. Scientists say that there has never been any global ocean.
Well, that's where Moses chooses to start. But they're correct.
They are correct.
That the earth had a pre-formation stage before the ocean developed. They say this because Moses chooses to start with that ocean.
But they start with all the times before that ocean developed. There was a molten earth cooling down that had developed with all the other planets from the materials that were thrown out from the sun.
As in matter, extended out from the sun.
This is labeled as Precambrian time. It is divided into two as a Hadean eon.
Hadean. That means like Hades.
You mean like hell? Hot, on fire, all toxic and poisonous? So that's like hell. Like in Star Trek, a Y-class planet, a demon planet. A demon planet? Whoa, that's awesome. So, class X or Z, right?
Or formation, before all the water formed, a single ocean on the planet. And the later Precambrian time is called the Archean eon, a toxic atmosphere with the first bacteria.
I wonder if that means archaic.
Though the air was toxic, the first bacteria created can live in this environment as water forms.
The difference between the claims of scientists and that of Moses is that they present an earth whose oceans that began in valleys then grew to never become one ocean. They choose this because it defeats the claim of the Bible, where this whole ocean came back again during Noah. They choose to believe that growth of mountains were faster and became higher than the growth of the ocean. Yet the layer of earth verify that global ocean after global ocean and alternating sea upon vegetative land, upon sea, verifies the land has gone up and down and up and down, inundating whole continents time after time. What causes this is asteroid impacts. The impact fractures not only the crust, but fractures and melts the mantle under it, under the seafloor, and under the continents. The continents thus become built up with materials created by water, and rock, and vegetation, and sands, and in layers that become less weight than compressed fluid water of the oceans. In this way, the crust of all continents get thicker without sinking, but instead actually float higher on the Earth's mantle. Any child will ask its father that if one rock sinks into the sea to the bottom, then why doesn't the whole continent of rock sink so that water stays above all land? But scientists are like religion. They make many contradictions, like saying if a sheet of ice cap is thick enough and high enough, even a mile high, that it can then push upward against Earth's gravity from sea level, floating on the water, uphill 500 feet for 1,000 miles inland. They fail to note that the thicker the ice, the deeper it will sink into the Arctic Ocean, to the floor, and still not push upward over Canada. The deception is accomplished by using the word down over Canada, but none of us seeing Arctic rivers flowing down Canada to flood America, do we? Just as the Nile River flows downhill north, not south. So as the earth cooled, water was created upon it. As the swaddling band around a baby, the cloud of water around the earth condensed and formed a massive single ocean. As it condensed, the ocean got deeper. This put weight on the crustal plates, cracking them. Asteroids would continue to impact the earth, causing tectonics to lift sheets of ocean floor land to rise above the water and sink again. In doing so, materials were being created that would cause the land to be made of materials different and lighter than the ocean floor, with its massive weight of compressed water. So now, let's start over. Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And there was a 24-hour night upon the ocean. But God said, "Let there be light." And the cloud encircling the earth began to thin, so that light then came to be upon the ocean. And so there was once only night, but now there was also day. And it came to be that this was the first day upon the earth. 7,000 years are 2,520,000 days, and both the days and the nights got brighter and brighter. With light came the bacteria and the microscopic plant life of day one, the Precambrian Protozoic eon that leads into the Phanerozoic eon of six-day Genesis. This leads into the life created by God during day two, as God removes the weight of the water in the cloud to create an atmosphere under the cloud. As he does, he is preparing the earth for man who would not be able to live in the current levels of air mixture, nor live under the weight of the water above. The periods that span day two are Precambrian Proterozoic eon with bacteria. This dates as 46,000 BC. But carbon-14 will date it as 66,000 BC because the removal of the water canopy in Noah's flood will cause a 20,000 year difference. Then, the latter part of day one is the Phanerozoic eon, which begins the 6 days of Genesis before Adam. Once the correction is made with the flood to show that it is being misstated as 20,000 years more than it really is, we have a correction factor that allows man to be 6,000 years old with that 1,656 years before that flood. With 7 days of 7,000 years, totaling 49,000 years, we have 48,000 years since day one. This is only 42,000 years from the beginning of day one to Adam's creation. Carbon-14 agrees with this, because carbon-14 has a maximum of 70,000 years, but an average trustworthy 50,000 years. The only difference is that when corrected 20,000 years for the flood, the 50,000 years of plant life becomes only 30,000 years, and the maximum extension of 20,000 years more, what was formerly 70,000, is only 50,000. Thus we have 30,000 years in which plant life was on the continents, and 20,000 years before that, which plant life was in the oceans. This places day two at 39,000 BC with the Cambrian period, and it is day three that then begins the Carboniferous period, when land remains above the water, no longer going up and down from asteroid impact, one global flood after another each time an asteroid strikes. When an asteroid does strike, the occurrence of meltdown underneath the crust within the mantle causes a tsunami. Not a tsunami of ocean water, but a tsunami of melted magma underneath the crust. This flow goes out under the ocean, causing the ocean floor to lift, and so the land drops, and then comes back and causes the land to rise back up. Therefore, the global flood, each time it occurs, lasts a full year. And then hundreds of years go by, 1,000 years, and another asteroid comes along and it happens again. And this is why you have layer after layer of floods and fossils that Noah himself could see before his flood came along. So the layers of geology show that while Jehovah God was creating plants and animals, that over and over again there were impacts to make the land higher, to bring it up higher. And it would wash over the land, create fossils, make species go extinct, and then it would start all over again, surviving. Thus, prior to day 3, every time there was an asteroid impact, the land would rise up above the water and then drop down under the water again. By the time day 3 came along, day 3 retained the land above the water, but to make the land higher and higher, it had to continue to be sunk and brought back up, thus creating layers on the land. Thus we have day 3 and day 4 and 5 and 6 until Adam is created. But why wouldn't anybody listen to Noah? The answer is very simple. It is because human beings have older brothers. They are a creation of beings exactly like God, much, much smaller than God, not nearly as vast of energy and a body of galaxies and stars. God is so massive, he contains the whole universe as his body. Yet these angels dwell between the stars, between the planets. They dwell in space. They don't need to live on any planet at all because their energy, their spirits like God. Yet they are older brothers to human beings. They can see what's happening on Earth no matter where they are in the heavens, no matter where they are in the galaxies. And so they came down to Earth to help human beings, to help mankind, because they thought that they were in a position to do so. One of the things created was a calendar. The calendar decade is 10 years of 360 days. And the calendar is called Asar, or Shar. The name of this decade is called Asar or Ashar. Some nations pronounce the S with a soft sound like Sar, and others pronounce it as SH, Shar. This word is said to mean 3,600 days. Now that's evolved into the word that means king or king of kings, as in Tsar, Shar, Sar, Caesar. The calendar guides us so that it is a leader or a ruler. Leader and ruler are English words that both mean king. This can be found in many names. Sarah, they say, means princess. That's because her name is Sarah, or Shara. So it's a derivative of the same word. The fact that today the word is used for kings around the world verifies it originated as the name of this calendar decade created by pre-flood kings. The word is still used to this day in Arabia as the Shah. And in Persia, ancient Elam, the highest of Shahs is called the Shah-an-Shah. A village in North Iran is called Sar-an-Sar. And in the ancient king list we have the king Sargon and Shar-Kali-Shar, king of 4 kings. The Kali being 1 quarter in Arabia and a quarter of the calendar in India, where the Krita Yuga or Kwarta Yuga is 4 Yuga or 4 of Kali Yuga. How this is derived from calendars back to Noah and then Adam is explained further later on in this presentation. But here we have the Shar created before the flood. As a calendar, it becomes the name of kings. but it derived from the fact that this was a calendar, and the calendar's New Year's Day was called the leader. So by taking the lead, or being the leader, the first day of the year, the first day of the decade, you were being a shar. And so the first shars were angels. They were the older brothers, they were the elders, they were the ones who ruled mankind. This is an indication that it is these kings or these angels who had created this calendar. Another example is the word ruler. A ruler is something you measure with. You can measure distance, you can measure time. The calendar measures time, and so it's a ruler. The calendar rules. An example of this would be Josephus. Josephus doesn't say Adam lived 930 years. He says he ruled 930 years. He doesn't say Methuselah lived 969 years. He says Methuselah ruled 969 years. Presumably, then, the first king to rule mankind is the one who created the calendar. This was Alulim. Alulim began to rule, and he ruled for 8 sars. That's 80 years. Then he gave his throne over to Alamar, or Alagar. He ruled 10 sars, which is 100 years. He gave the throne to Enmenluana, who ruled for 12 sars, or 120 years. Thus these kings passed the throne on the new year of the Sar, and it's an additional reason why they were called Sars, or kings. Kachuna was the 4th king. He ruled from the city of Larsa before the flood. This is before Noah's children had rebuilt Larsa after the flood, and he ruled 12 sars, 120 years. After him, the 5th was Enmen-Galana, 8 sars. Dumuzi ruled 10 sars, 100 years. He was called the shepherd. Then ruled Sibziana. He was the 7th king who ruled 8 sars, 80 years. Then Enmendarana, and then Uburatum, and lastly the 10th king was Zinsudu. Zinsudu ruled 180 years, which is 18 sars. And then the flood came. Having come down to earth, these angels took on flesh. They took on human bodies that they had created from the nitrogen air, turning the nitrogen air into carbon, which is therefore bodies of carbon-14. Therefore, they ruled from cities. They lived amongst us in cities just as we do. So, the first 2 kings, Alulim and Alamar, they lived in the city of Eridu. And when kingship was given to the 3rd king, Enmenluana lived in the city of Bad-Guguru. Now, Bad-Guguru means city of bronze makers. So apparently he was the one that taught humans how to make metal, melt it down. Then the 4th king, Kachuna, he was the 1st king of the city of Larsa. After Kachuna, Enmen-Galana took up rule, and he was in Bad-Guguru again. So the rulership had returned to that city. Dumuzi likewise ruled from Bad-Guguru. Then Sibziana took up rule in Larik, and after Larik, the city of Sippar, where Enmen-Darana ruled. Then the last 2 kings, Uburatum and Kaisuthros, or Zinsudu, ruled from the city of Sharupik. Sharupik is where Noah was born and raised. Another form of Bad-Guguru is the name Bad-Tabira. So the city of Bad-Tabira is the same as Bad-Guguru. When the flood came, the first tsunami came up the Gulf, Persian Gulf, and it came into the city of Sharupik, wiping it out, and it lifted up the ark, and it pushed the ark 520 miles all the way to Mount Ararat. And thus, the ark was floating on the level waters of a tsunami, just like we see in Japan. All the videos of the tsunami, the water just raised up and came flowing in. However, we have a problem with the rest of the world seeing these 10 kings. And the reason the problem exists is because of an ancient record. The ancient record is that of Kaisuthros speaking to the people, claiming that he is Noah. It is a poem that is taken in seance. Noah has died, he's gone to heaven, and the spirit Kaisuthros is saying that he is Noah, and that he had ascended to heaven during these 40 days of Noah's death, in fact, ascended to heaven during the 40 days of the flood. This is why you'll find some flood poems that say Noah survived the flood and then he went 40 days up to heaven. He was rewarded immediately after the flood with eternal life in heaven. The confusion, therefore, takes these 10 kings and thinks that it's our 10 forefathers, that Alulim is Adam, and that Kaisuthros is Noah. As you can see, when you translate a day for a year, the 360 days of every year, the kings only ruled for 970 years. Therefore, they can't be Adam. To determine this, there are 4 different lists that disagree with each other. Few people know that there are also more than one Genesis, because Genesis 2 has been altered. But when we analyze both Genesis and this list, we can determine what the truth is. The list that is acceptable is the list that is the length of Methuselah's life. The first king began rule when Enoch had his son Methuselah, and the future would depend on that son and how he was raised. Would he be obeying the angels, learning from the angels, or would he be defying him as his father would come to? We are actually blessed to have 4 errors in these lists. The reason why is because comparing these 4 errors, we are able to see that there are 3 events that normally we would not have seen, and it will explain them. Error number 1, the life of Enoch. Enoch is the 7th forefather. As the 7th forefather, he is taken. His body is dematerialized. It's translated. Yet each list has a 7th king. So if the first king is Adam, and the last king, the 10th king, is Noah, then the 7th king would be Enoch. However, look at all 4 of these lists. Enoch dies a short life, and the 7th king of the first list is after Enoch dies. The 7th king of the second list is after Enoch dies. In fact, all the kings that are 7th in the list are after Enoch. Therefore, if Enoch is not the 7th king, nor is Adam the first king, nor is Noah the last king. But this even emphasizes something even more important. Because if Enoch is not the 7th king, then it verifies that the spirit, Kaisuthros, who spoke to say he was Noah in heaven, that he wasn't. He was wrong. He was an angel that was lying. This also means then Hindu belief is incorrect. It is wrong. Noah did not die and go to heaven to become Vishnu. Vishnu's spirit is not in heaven. We are actually blessed by Enoch giving up his life to defy angels, because had he not given up his life and defied them, we would not have this proof or evidence right here that proves that the 10 kings are not our 10 forefathers. But the 2 made a promise. Before Noah died, he promised that he would return. And during the seance, Kaisuthros too said that he would return. And so in our day, we should expect the return of the Savior and the return of the spirit who stood against him. And so the beast that was 1 horn, 1 king, became 2 horns, 2 kings, and 3 and 4, until Revelation says that in the time of the ends, the beast will come forth that has 10 kings, it has 10 horns. In the first 300 years of kingship, with King Alulim, King Alamar, King Emenluana, there is 300 years from the birth of Methuselah until Enoch vanishes. In this period of 3 kings, the shorter list removes 2 kings in order to have the first king rule when Enoch disappears. This puts Alulim in the same year as Enoch's death and King Kachuna, the 4th king of the other list. It implies that Alulim is passing his kingship to Kachuna and that Enoch is forbidding it. He's cursing it, condemning it. So therefore that puts Enoch in the city of Larsa. And Kachuna is there, king of Larsa, to become king of the world, and Alulim is passing this kingship to him. It strongly implies that it was Alulim that struck Enoch down, not Kachuna. Therefore, when Kachuna was appalled that somebody was making a scene that he from heaven should be king, Alulim used his power to dematerialize Enoch's body, or translated him, meaning that his body was able to disassemble and disappear right in front of people without harming other people. This would have to take something like antimatter, not fission or fusion, which is an explosion when you explode a single atom, but instead a force or power that is from heaven only. And therefore the people would be confused whether this was an act of God punishing Enoch or whether it was an act of God saving Enoch. Were these angels representative of God? Or were they just like human beings who use atomic bombs and take matters into their own hands, with power that is definitely from God? Now, what possible accusation could Enoch have against the angels? After 300 years of speaking and letting 3 kings ruling the whole planet, why would he suddenly have an accusation to prevent the 4th king from ruling? What would that possibly be? Well, Genesis says that the angels began to take daughters for wives. So we could possibly imagine that he accidentally killed someone and he's doing the responsible thing to take her as a wife and provide children for this man that he killed. Easily a plot to obtain what he wants, perhaps her idea to do so. The human body is made up mostly of water, which is hydrogen and oxygen. However, without the fluid water, the most common solid mass of the human body is carbon. This carbon is found even in the DNA, whose instructions can harm the results of the human body. In the side rails of the DNA are sugar molecules of 4 or 5 carbons, and the rungs of the DNA contain cytosine paired with guanine or thymine paired with adenine. All 4 have carbon atoms totaling in charted diagrams as 39 carbon atoms to connect these 4 molecules with 4 molecules of sugar. Then there are 15 nitrogen atoms which can turn into carbon-14 atoms. The percentage of these carbon-14 atoms is what ages the human body. It is almost impossible for nitrogen atoms in our cells to turn into carbon-14 because the Earth shields us from cosmic rays in 2 ways. One is the magnetic field, the other is the thickness of atmosphere. The magnetic field pulls cosmic rays to the north and south poles, where most of them strike the Earth there instead of at the equator. And few cosmic rays and gamma rays reach it to the Earth, because our atmosphere is like equal to 12 feet of aluminum. Many theologians presume that with the collapse of the water canopy that these rays decreased longevity by an increased death rate of cells. However, if this were the direct cause, then it would mean 950-year-old Noah would have grandsons that all died at about 70 to 90, instead of our Paxad living 438 years, half of Grandpa Noah. So 12 times more cosmic and gamma rays has more effect on producing our enemy than actually being the direct enemy. That enemy is carbon-14. A body cell whose nitrogen atom turns into carbon-14 is less likely to die so instantly as when that nitrogen atom is in the DNA of a chromosome. There are signs that rapid aging can occur with radiation poisoning, however the body heals from it. The body purges many materials that enter it, but it won't purge it at a faster rate merely because it's radioactive. The problem occurs when the body is constructed with the carbon-14, because then it will retain the substance until purged. This would be the case if a nitrogen inside us turns into carbon-14, which is very rare, because cosmic and gamma rays do not reach us very much, nor very often. However, we are in contact daily with carbon-14 from nitrogen air that has already turned into carbon-14 high above us at 6 miles, or 30,000 feet. This mild radioactive carbon-14 joins oxygen to make mild radioactive carbon dioxide. Thus, when we eat carbon-14 as sugar and fat and protein from plants or animals, we then burn it and breathe it back out. It is only the constructing of our body cells with it that then retains it in a dangerous connection to our body's regeneration. This is proven by the true post-flood chronology. The greatest danger does not occur to the adult like Noah, who eats for 350 years to age 950. Yet it does occur. Shem, who was protected 100 years before the flood, then loses 350 years of life by eating 500 years after the flood. Yet the grandchildren are all immediately cut in half of longevity by what they grow up eating. This means that if angels come down, they are a risk factor to all organic life by the cosmic rays they emit, the gamma rays, and becoming solid flesh, they will hourly and daily and yearly create carbon-14 if their process of being human is by making carbon bodies from nitrogen air instead of from carbon dioxide. Thus it is beyond a mere moral level that Enoch says, "Leave us all, go home, because you are killing us." This will be later covered in the post-flood study of the soaring carbon-14 levels. Point 3. By looking at the four lists, we see that there is a longest list of 456,000 days, which they will say is 456,000 years. This is 1,266 years and 2/3, 240 days. What this does is bring into question why is it that the kings are ruling whole SARs of 10 years, and now a list is put together that is incomplete or in the middle of a year and in the middle of a decade? Well, the solution is very simple. What it does is it counts from even decades from Adam. This gives the impression that this list was based on the year that the calendar was created, because it's year 390 of Adam. 390 is the 40th decade. It is the 40th SAR. This indicates that the SARs, or decades, were originally created with Adam as the epoch. So that would mean when the angels created the calendar in the year 390, they proclaimed it not as year 1, but as year 390, so that the calendar began with 391 as the first year of the first new decade calendar. This would come to change when the kings began to rule, because when the kings began to rule, then the people would regard the decades of the king. So many decades, 8 decades of Alulam, the next 10 decades, 100 years, so that there became two systems. The new year was always the same to every year, to every decade, but the year chosen for the decade was not the same. The decades of the kings were not the same years as the decades for Adam. Noah was born on the decade of the kings. And that is why 60 decades of Noah, as 600 years, also equal 97 decades of the kings. The proof of this is in the Chinese calendar, because the Chinese calendar continues to count 10 years in cycles. And these were originally the SARs of 3,600 days, or 10 years of 360 days each. And in the Chinese calendar, it was altered. It became Egyptian years, and then it became lunar years of Julian calendar, accounting for leap days. So although the Chinese calendar did not exist, 12-year calendar, until King Yu, Chinese King Yu, created it, the 10-year cycle did exist. And so the 10-year names had a dual system. They had the decades of Adam and the decades of the kings, which became the decades of Noah. Thus, the year 7 of every decade of Adam was Kia, or Gia, while this same year 7 of Adam was year 1 of Noah. From 1 to 11 to 21 to 31 to 41, they were all 7s, or Kia, Gia of Adam, but they were Wu, 1 for Noah. So when the flood came and then ended with removing the ark door on the calendar new year 601, this was year 1657 AM of Adam. Thus Wu of Noah's decades, but Kia of Adam's decades. Jupiter was in the zodiac stars of Z, the rat. The fourth final point is that of the list of Berosus, the second list. This list has Babylon as the most ancient city of the world, the first city built before the flood. Totally in error. For any other purpose, the list is definitely wrong, because this is a list by Babylonian priest Berosus. And what he does is he claims the very first city is Babylon, built before the flood. Next we have the calling upon of God Jehovah when Enosh died. What does it mean? Well, to call upon Jehovah means to call upon cause and effect. It means to call out for what will accomplish a purpose. The only thing that would be is the aging and dying of the human beings. We have here Enosh, and his relationship is that he is a grandson. As the grandson of Adam himself, we're talking about the death of only one man. We're not talking about him having brothers who die. Adam didn't have brothers who died. Adam didn't have grandfathers who died or fathers who died. There was no other human being who had died other than his son Abel, killed by Cain. What happens, therefore, is the next influx of death is going to be the first generation, Adam's sons and Adam's daughters. So when Adam dies, from that point forward, at the end of the life of Enosh, he's going to experience his aunts and uncles dying. And what's going to happen is they're going to realize that the children have the same prospect that the father has. So when it says that the calling is out upon Jehovah, it says in the days of Enosh. Now, if we compare that to Peleg, we find that there are incidences all throughout Peleg's life that prove that there's a confusion during his life. But it's at the very end of Peleg's life, when he dies, that the matters are all confused. So the same here. The calling effect has to do with Enosh. Is he going to die or is he not? Are the grandchildren affected by aging and death? From this chart, we can get the type of lifestyle that they were living. We see that Adam died during the city that ruled of Bad-Gaguru. Bad-Gaguru is the city of bronze. It is the city of bronze workers. So the people are being put to work to dig metal, melt down metal. It doesn't mean they have factories, but it's during a time when someone might be in a situation where they're breathing in the smelting of the metals, and it gives them cancer, lung cancer, it gives them black lung. There could be any type of illnesses because of working with bronze. Now we have this followed up with the city of Larsa, where Enoch lived. However, Bad-Gaguru takes over control again. This doesn't mean that the city quit melting bronze for those years in between. It lost its world control, but it didn't lose its existence or what it did with bronze. So we have here that this calling is from the time of Adam's death, where the city of bronze was in control, and then we have Enosh's death, where the city of bronze was in control again, and we have Enosh dying. Possibly from it, possibly not, but he's not able to escape death, and during this whole period of time, the sons and daughters of Adam are dying. And so Enosh has nothing to look forward to but this fate. So you could call out to God all you want, you're not going to stop aging and death. And that's what this is about, calling in vain regarding death. So the calling upon Jehovah to say, please save us from death. Though it began with Adam dying, it was only one person, and it wasn't as much of a fear as when the sons and daughters of Adam began to die from old age. And so it's when Enosh's own father dies that this calling gets louder. Oh, Jehovah, save us. And that calling is answered, because although it seems like it's a calling in vain, nobody's answering, we're all getting old, we are all dying. That call came forth as Noah, because before Enosh died, Noah was born, and he understood the position that the world was in, getting old and dying. So then what does that mean? If you die when you're 900, does that mean, oh, well, it doesn't matter what we do then because we're going to die? If I fall from a rock when I'm 90, it's okay to die young? If I trip and fall into a canyon when I'm 203, that's okay. We're all going to die anyways. Can't live past 900. Is this the attitude to have? Well, although Noah saved the world, what he did was save the world from another kind of death. A death where everybody dies at once, like a car accident or a burning building. Something where masses of people die, because it's not just about the individual getting old and we're going to die. What can we do? We get old and fall over. or we get diseased because of being old. So Noah brought into attention there is more to be alert about Jehovah and more to know about Jehovah than just wondering if we can ever stop aging. Because if you die from an accident before you get old, you're dead. You won't get old. If you die when you're 25 because you trip and fall, break your neck, then you're not going to see 900 years. You're not going to see 90 years, whether it's a young 90 or whether it's a very old 90. So we have a situation where people dying before 1,000 years puts the world where a son notes years later that his father would have been 1,000 years old. For example, Adam died at 930, and 70 years later, Seth would be able to say, my father would have been 1,000 this year. But then 42 years later, Seth dies at 912. Give that 88 years, and Enosh was able to say, my father would have been 1,000 this year. Sons are dying after their fathers. Then Enosh, 10 years later, dies at 905, and 95 years later, his son Canaan is able to say, my father would have been 1,000 this year. But Canaan dies that year also. He dies the year his father does. Maybe he dies right before the new year, before his father would have been 1,000. So now, 90 years later, Canaan would have been 1,000, but his son isn't able to say that because his son dies before then, at 895. And when Mahalalel dies at 895, his son is able to say, yes, my father would have been 1,000 this year. This is 105 years later. Because at that time, Jared is now the oldest man to have ever lived in this line of forefathers. Jared, being 962, is living 32 years more than Adam. It is then that it is Jared's son who was killed by the angels, dematerialized, as if he's acting against God, against the elders, the angels, the brotherhood. And it is Jared's grandson who is Methuselah and turns out to live longer than anyone we've ever known on record. So the situation is where some people were able to honor the 1,000th year of their father, their grandfather, their great-grandfather. Each of these were able to say that their ancestor or forefather would have been 1,000 this year. The reason why this is of import is because notice that the angels never reach 1,000 years of ruling as kings. They've been on the earth for 1,000 years. With the calendar created 1,266 years before the flood, they've been on earth for more than 1,000 years. But as far as actually taking control and kingship, they've been ruling for only 970 years. The last 30 years is taken away from them. This 30 years is given to Noah, because after the flood, the oldest person is Noah and 7 others. Therefore, it is Noah who is getting the 30 years. This is quite significant because the furthest planet you can see with your eye is the planet Saturn, and it orbits once in 30 years. And so people regarded a person living long enough to be wise if they're 30 years. Jupiter is only 12 years, and how smart can a 12-year-old be? But at 30 years, they regard a person as a man. They've reached the height of the heavens. They've reached Saturn, the orbit of Saturn, which is 30 years. We have Jesus as an example, who decided to get baptized at 30. It's not that all Jews were baptizing at 30 or that all Jews regarded people as a man at 30. But it has to do with this origin of the planet Saturn being the longest clock or biggest clock. It has to do with the fact that the angels ruled 970 years, but they weren't allowed to have 1,000 years. That 30 years was given to Noah. It was taken from them and given to Noah. What was high, what was on high and ruling big, the angels ruling for God, was plummeted down for being wrong, and Noah, one person in the world, was exalted high, so that when the ark was raptured up on the waters, it was lifting Noah above all the others who are now dead. So even though the flood itself was very fearful and made you feel like you were trapped in a coffin, the ark as a coffin, he was alive and they were not. So he was being lifted up and exalted, And after the flood, being that he is the oldest, then any other human being on earth, no matter how big the population gets, it exalted him. It rewarded him with, whether he wanted it or not, a respect. And this is Noah. He's God. This is very much like Moses. Once Moses brought them through the Red Sea, they feared him as if he was God, as if anything he said could instantly happen with magic and miracles and power. They didn't fear him for predicting the 10 plagues. They feared him because the Red Sea parted when he said it would. And therefore, this put a fear into them. To a degree, because, naturally they started finding fault, saying, look who he's married to, look who Jehovah's with all of us, not just him. So they lost the appreciation for him. They went